All right, so three little pigs, right? And a wolf. It's like one of those stories we all just kind of have in our heads forever from when we were kids. But did you ever stop and think, is that really like the whole story?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? How we just sort of accept these big stories we grow up with without really questioning them. They almost become like part of like our cultural, like DNA or something.
Totally. And that's what we're going to do today, kind of shake things up a bit. We're going deep into the true story of the Three Little Pigs by Jon Scieszka. It's like getting the story straight from the wolf's mouth. You know, Al.
We've been digging into a lot of stuff about this book, like how it's been received, what people think about it. And the thing that keeps coming up is you got to look closer, you know? There's always more to the story than you might think.
You might think you know this story already, but Al, the wolf, well, he wants to tell us his side of things, and it really gets you thinking. He's not just some monster like we've always heard.
Well, at least not according to him. He wants us to see him as, just a victim of circumstance.
Yeah.
And that change in perspective, that's really the heart of what this book is all about.
Okay, so forget that image of the big bad wolf, the huffing and puffing. Our narrator, he's Alexander T. Wolf, Al for short. And where is he telling us the story from? Well, a jail cell.
Yeah, that's such a clever way to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Putting Owl behind bars right away, it kind of hints that the story we think we know, maybe it's not the whole truth. Like, there's this sense of, like, an injustice, a plea for him to be heard.
And Al's big argument, the story everyone knows, it's all made up. He wasn't out to cause any trouble. He just wanted something pretty simple, actually.
Well, as simple as a wolf going to a pig's house can be, I guess. But yeah, Al says he was just being a good grandson. He needed a cup of sugar to bake a birthday cake for his granny.
Granny. Of course, family always comes first, right? So right from the start, Al wants us to see him as like this caring grandson who just needs to do some baking. And he's very clear he is not the big bad wolf, not at all.
It's that clash, right? The way Al sees himself versus that monster everyone thinks he is. It really makes you think about how reputations get made, and how powerful a story can be, especially if it's the only one people hear.
So let's hear Al's story. He goes to the first little pig's house, the one made of straw, and what does he say happened?
Well, Al says he knocked politely, just like a neighbor would, but he also says he had this really bad cold. And the straw house, well, it wasn't exactly, built to last, so it just sort of gave way.
Just crumbled, right. And then poor Al with this awful cold, he sneezes.
A big sneeze, like a really powerful one. And unfortunately, the first pig was inside. The sneeze, it was so strong. The house, which was already weak, it collapsed. Then the pig didn't make it.
Okay, and here's where Al's story takes a turn. He admits that, yes, he ate the pig, but not because he's some, evil carnivore.
Right. Al's logic is the pig was already, gone. And he was just being practical, He didn't want good food to go to waste. It's amazing how he takes something, kind of gruesome and makes it sound like he's just being efficient. It makes you think, can changing how you tell a story actually change what it means? Like, can it make something bad seem less bad? It's a really tricky question to think about.
It is. So still no sugar. And Al, he goes on to the second pig's house, the one made of sticks. Another polite knock. Still got that awful cold. What happens next?
According to Al, same thing, pretty much. This second pig, also not willing to share any sugar, and then another big sneeze. The stick house, just as fragile as the first one, it couldn't handle the force. And the second pig, well, he also met an unfortunate end.
And Al, being Al, he thinks, well, I can't let this go to waste, right? So 2 pigs down, still no sugar, and he's just trying to bake a cake for Granny. You almost start to, kind of see things from his point of view.
You almost do, yeah. But then we get to the third pig, the one with the brick house. This is where Al's story really changes how we think about the whole thing.
Yeah, this pig, he sounds like a real piece of work. Not only does he not give Al the sugar, but things they get pretty heated, right?
They do. Al says the third pig was really rude, like even insulting his granny. It's really interesting how the author, Mara Sissig, takes this pig, who's supposed to be the good guy, and shows us his flaws, It makes you think, maybe things aren't so black and white, even in fairy tales. Maybe even heroes have their bad sides. It's kind of like a glimpse into how people really are, And that's what really set Al off.
Insulting Granny. That's just not cool, even for a wolf. So Al gets mad, understandably, and tries to get into the brick house, but he doesn't try to blow it down, does he?
No, that's a really important point. Al says he was huffing and puffing, yeah, but he was trying to break the door down, so he was angry. He wasn't using some kind of magic wolf breath to destroy the whole house like in the original story. The brick house, it was strong,
Yeah.
well built, so of course it didn't fall down.
And just as Al's trying to get in, who shows up? The
The
cops.
pig police, yeah. And then, even worse for Al, the media shows up too, the reporters. And the book, it has these illustrations that show all these important people, the police, reporters, they're all pigs too.
Which makes you wonder, right? Is this fair? Al says the reporters, they twisted everything. They made his search for sugar and those, unfortunate sneezing incidents, they turn it all into this big, big bad wolf story.
Exactly. Al wants us to believe that it was all just bad luck, that he was just a guy trying to bake a cake, and then he got sick. He feels like nobody understands him, like they judged him before they even knew the whole story, just because he's a wolf.
His version, it actually makes you think twice, doesn't it? Let's break down the main differences between his story and the one we all know. First, there's the wolf's motivation. Baking a cake for Granny or just wanting to eat the pigs, those are two very different things. So think about it. As you hear Al's story, do you feel differently about him compared to how you felt about the wolf in the original story?
Oh, absolutely. In the original, the wolf is just hungry.
Right.
That's all he wants. But Al, he's saying he was motivated by love, by wanting to do something nice for his grandmother. That changes everything.
Then there's how the houses get destroyed. In the classic story, the wolf blows them down on purpose. But what about in Al's version?
In his version, it's all accidental. The houses fall down because of his sneezes, and maybe because they weren't very well built in the first place. It makes you see the wolf's role very differently, right? In the original, he's powerful, he's deliberately causing destruction. But Al, he's saying it was an accident, something he couldn't help.
And what about those first two pigs? In the classic story, they get blown away and eaten. What about in Al's story?
Al says they died because their houses fell on them, and then he ate them because, well, he didn't want to be wasteful. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference in how we see the wolf, right? It makes him seem less like a killer and more like someone who is just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Right, and then there's the wolf himself. Big bad villain in one story and kind of a victim of circumstance in the other. And what about the pigs? They're always the innocent ones in the original, right?
Well, Al doesn't exactly paint them as innocent. He suggests that the first two were kind of foolish for building such weak houses, and he says the third one was just plain rude. It's like he flips the whole story, makes us wonder if maybe the wolf wasn't so bad after all, and maybe the pigs weren't so good.
And the endings are totally different too. The clever pig tricks the wolf and he gets boiled alive, versus Al ending up in jail, feeling like everyone's got him all wrong. We even have a table here that shows all these differences side by side. It's amazing to see how different the two stories are, even though they're about the same events.
That table is really useful, I think. It helps you, the listener, see all the big changes and how they change, how we understand what happened. It's not just small details. It's like a whole different world.
So this is more than just a funny retelling of an old story, isn't it? There are some big ideas here, some things that make you think. Let's talk about truth and perspective, for example.
Yeah, that's really what this Bets is all about, I think. Al's story, it shows us that the same thing can look totally different depending on who's describing it. It makes you wonder, can we ever really know the truth about anything? Or are we always seeing things through our own eyes, our own experiences? Think about a time when you felt like someone wasn't listening to your side of the story. Can you relate to how frustrated Al feels?
It makes you think about all the stories we believe. Maybe there's another side to them, another version we haven't heard.
Exactly. It encourages us to think more carefully about what we hear, to be aware of bias, and to be open to the possibility that there might be other explanations, even for stories we think we already know.
And then there's this idea of, like, accidents versus doing something on purpose. Al says he didn't mean to hurt the pigs. Does that matter?
That's a really deep question, isn't it? Is Al responsible for what happened to the pigs, even if it was because of his sneeze and because their houses were so weak? Or does it matter that he didn't mean to do it? It's a question that goes way beyond fairy tales. It's about how we understand accidents, responsibility, blame, all those things in the real world.
And we can't forget that Al, he's a wolf, right? And everyone else seems to be a pig. Do you think that might have something to do with how his story was received, by the police and the media?
The book definitely seems to suggest that, yeah, the fact that all the people in charge, the police, the reporters, they're all pigs, It raises some big questions about whether Al was ever going to get a fair hearing. It's like
Yeah.
it shows how bias, how prejudice can shape the stories we tell and how things turn out, sometimes in a really unfair way.
It's subtle, but it's a powerful point. It's like we judge people based on who they are, not what they actually do.
So,
And then there's the whole good versus bad thing. The original story, it's very clear who's good and who's bad. But this book, it's not so simple.
it's not, no. The original story, it's like a morality tale, right? There's a hero, the smart pig, and a villain, the big bad wolf. But Kadeska, he mixes things up. Al, who's supposed to be the bad guy, he comes across as flawed, but not really evil. And the third pig, he's actually kind of unlikable. It makes us question those easy labels.
Hmm.
Maybe the so-called bad guy isn't all bad, and the good guy might not be so good after all.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? Whose story are we listening to?
It all comes back to that, yeah. Just by changing the point of view, the whole story changes. The characters, what they do, why they do it, it all looks different.
And the true story of the Three Little Pigs, it's not just a random weird story, is it? It fits into this whole genre of, what are they called? Fractured fairy tales?
Exactly. Sieska's book is a perfect example of that.
Mhm.
It's like they take these classics fairy tales and they retell them, but with a twist. Sometimes it's just for fun to make you laugh, but often it's more than that. It's about seeing things from a different angle, questioning the stories we've always been told. And these fractured fairy tales, they're not just for kids either. They're actually really important for adults too, because they make us think about the stories we believe and how they shape how we see the world.
And Scieszka, he seems to be like a master of this kind of thing, right? He wrote The Stinky Cheese Man, too, another really clever example of playing with familiar stories.
Yeah, he's great at taking those stories we all know and turning them upside down. And there's so many other good examples out there. The Three Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig. That one flips the script, makes the pig the villain, which is really funny.
Hmm.
And there's Look Out, Wolf. There's a beast in your book where the wolf is actually the hero.
Oh, that sounds great. And there's Goldilocks and the Three Dinosaurs by Mo Willems. That one's so funny. It takes a classic story and makes it completely absurd.
Exactly. And if you're into martial arts, you have to check out the Three Ninja Pigs. Even Little Red Riding Hood gets to tell her side of the story from the wolf's point of view in the wolf story.
It's amazing how many different ways you can tell these stories, isn't it?
It really is. And it shows you how powerful those original stories are, how they can be reimagined and reinterpreted in so many creative and interesting ways. There's the Seriously Silly Stories series and the Once Upon a World series, which has all these multicultural retellings. Yeah, it's a whole world of fractured fairy tales out there.
And these fractured fairy tales, they're not just for entertainment, are they? They actually help us, both kids and adults, to think more critically about the stories we hear and what they're really saying.
Definitely. They encourage us to use our imaginations, to think for ourselves, and to understand that there isn't always just one right answer, one right way to see things. They teach us to question what we think we know and to be open to different points of view.
So who is this guy, this Jon Scieszka, who came up with this brilliant, twisted version of the Three Little Pigs? Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, Jon Scieszka, it's pronounced Scieszka. By the way, he's a really well-known American children's author, and he has a really interesting background. Before he started writing books, he was actually an elementary school teacher. And knowing that, it kind of makes sense why his stories are so funny and a little bit rebellious. Like he gets kids, he gets how they think, and he knows how to make them laugh while also making them think. It's like he's using humor to say something really important about how we understand truth, how it's not always about being perfectly good, but about seeing things from different perspectives, even if those perspectives are a little messy, a little bit flawed. And humor is a great way to do that. It makes it easier to talk about complicated stuff.
That makes total sense. He probably learned a lot about what kids like to read, what keeps them interested.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He realized that humor was a really good way to get kids engaged, especially boys who sometimes aren't as into reading. And that understanding of his audience, it comes through in his writing. He often works with this amazing illustrator, Lane Smith, and together they create these books that are not only funny but also visually stunning, like The True Story of the Three Little Pigs.
They definitely have their own style, that's for sure. Scieszka, he has this talent for taking these classic stories and changing them just enough to make them funny and, more importantly, to make us think about what they really mean.
He really does.
Hmm.
He's had a huge impact on children's literature. He was actually the very first national ambassador for young people's literature, which means he traveled all over the U.S., encouraging kids to read. And he started this program called Guys Read, which is specifically designed to get more boys excited about reading.
That's awesome. He really cares about getting kids to love books, doesn't he?
He does. And his writing, it's so playful and witty and always funny. That's why his books, including The True Story of the Three Little Pigs, are so popular with both kids and adults. When you understand his background, how he thinks about storytelling, it really helps you appreciate what makes this book so unique and insightful.
So, to sum it all up, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. It gives us this really fun and surprising twist on a story we thought we knew. It makes you question everything, who's good, who's bad, what's the real story. And hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listener, a new way to think about not only this story, but all kinds of stories. It's about being open to different perspectives, to seeing things from different angles.
Absolutely. So here's something to think about. After hearing Al's side of things and learning about these fractured fairy tales, what other stories do you know that might have another side to them? Maybe it's another classic fairy tale or a historical event or even something happening in the world right now. Is there a different perspective waiting to be told?